Ever bought grapes at the store and thought, I wish I could grow these myself? Maybe you have tried before, but ended up with a tangled mess of vines that never produced much fruit. Here is the thing most people do not realize. Grapes are one of the easiest fruits to propagate. And once you understand the process, you can create an endless supply of vines from just a single plant. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the complete process of growing grapes from start to finish, covering everything from selecting the right varieties to harvesting baskets full of fruit. Plus, stick around to the end, where I will show you a simple propagation trick that lets you multiply your grapevines for free year after year. Let us get started. Grapes are one of the most rewarding fruits you can grow in your home garden. They are incredibly versatile, producing fruit you can eat fresh, turn into juice, make into jelly, or even dry into raisins. And the good news is they are far easier to grow than most people think. Once you get a vine established and learn a few key techniques, you will be harvesting grapes for decades. A single well-maintained grapevine can produce fruit for 50 years or more. So let us start by understanding a few basics about how grapes grow. Before we dive into the steps, it helps to understand what makes grapes tick. Grapevines are vigorous growers that produce fruit on one-year-old wood. What that means is the canes that grew last summer are the ones that will produce your grapes this summer. This is really important to understand because it affects how you prune and train your vines. Grapes need full sun, at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight per day, and they prefer well-drained soil. They are surprisingly cold-hardy once established, with some varieties surviving winters down to -20 or even -30 degrees Fahrenheit. But here is the key. Different varieties thrive in different climates, so choosing the right grape for your region is the first and most important decision you will make. Now let us talk about choosing the right grape varieties for your garden. This is where a lot of people go wrong. They see a beautiful grape at the nursery or get excited about growing wine grapes, and they end up with a variety that just will not perform in their climate. There are 3 main types of grapes you should know about. First, you have American grapes, which are varieties like Concord, Catawba, and Niagara. These are incredibly cold-hardy, typically thriving in USDA zones 4 through 8. They have that classic grape flavor, that bold, sweet taste you probably remember from grape juice and jelly as a kid. If you live in the northern half of the country where winters get cold, these are your best bet. Second, you have European grapes, which are the wine grapes and table grapes like Thompson's Seedless, Flame, and Cabernet. These need warmer climates and longer growing seasons, generally zones 7 through 10. They are less tolerant of humidity and more susceptible to fungal diseases. If you live in California, the Southwest, or parts of the Pacific Northwest, these can do beautifully. Third, you have Muscadine grapes, which are native to the southeastern United States. Varieties like Carlos, Noble, and Scuppernong thrive in zones 7 through 9 and actually need the heat and humidity that would destroy other grape types. If you live in the South, muscadines are absolutely the way to go. My recommendation is to start with varieties proven in your area. Talk to your local extension office or visit a nearby nursery that specializes in fruit. In my own garden, I grow Concord for juice and jelly, and I have a few table grape varieties for fresh eating. The Concords have never let me down, even after some brutal winters. Now here is where things get exciting. Once you have one grapevine, you can create as many new plants as you want through propagation. Grapes root incredibly easily from cuttings, and this is how commercial vineyards have multiplied their vines for centuries. You do not need any special equipment, just some pruning shears, a few pots or a patch of ground, and a little patience. The best time to take grape cuttings is during the dormant season, typically from late fall through early spring, after the leaves have dropped but before new growth begins. What you are looking for is healthy, pencil-thick canes from the previous season's growth. These are the canes that grew last summer. and they will be smooth and tan or brown in color, not the darker, rougher bark of older wood. Here is exactly how I do it. I cut sections of cane that are about 12 to 18 inches long, making sure each cutting has at least 3 or 4 nodes. The nodes are those little bumps along the cane where the buds are located. This is where your roots and new shoots will emerge. I make the bottom cut just below a node at a slight angle, and the top cut about an inch above a node, straight across. The angled bottom cut serves 2 purposes. It gives you more surface area for root development, and it helps you remember which end is down when you go to plant them. Now you can root these cuttings in a few different ways. The simplest method is to plant them directly in the ground in early spring. I dig a narrow trench about 8 inches deep in a spot with good drainage, stick the cuttings in with just the top bud above the soil line, and keep them watered. By fall, most of them will have developed roots and can be transplanted to their permanent location the following spring. If you want to get a head start, you can root cuttings indoors in late winter. I use tall pots or even milk jugs with the tops cut off, filled with a mix of potting soil and perlite. I stick the cuttings in so 2 nodes are below the soil and 1 or 2 are above. Keep them in a bright window and mist them regularly. Within 6 to 8 weeks, you should see roots forming at the bottom of the container and new leaves emerging from the top buds. One thing I have learned over the years is that bottom heat really speeds up rooting. If you have a seedling heat mat, place your containers on it and keep the soil temperature around 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The warmth encourages root development while the cooler air temperature keeps the top growth in check until the roots can support it. Once your cuttings have a good root system, usually visible through the drainage holes or when you gently tug and feel resistance, they are ready to be planted out. I like to harden them off for a week or 2 first, setting them outside in a sheltered spot for increasing amounts of time each day. This helps them adjust to outdoor conditions without going into shock. Now let us talk about planting your grapevines in their permanent home. Site selection is critical here. Grapes need full sun, and I mean real full sun, at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight every day. They also need good air circulation to prevent fungal diseases, so avoid planting them in low spots where cold air and moisture collect. For soil, grapes are actually pretty adaptable. They prefer well-drained soil with a pH between 6 and 6.5, but they will tolerate a range of conditions. What they absolutely cannot handle is soggy roots. If your soil is heavy clay, consider planting on a slope or building a raised bed. In my garden, I have sandy loam, which drains almost too well, so I add plenty of compost to help retain moisture. When you are ready to plant, dig a hole about 12 inches deep and 12 inches wide. If you are planting a bare root vine from a nursery, spread the roots out in the hole and position the plant so the graft union, if there is one, sits about 2 inches above the soil line. For rooted cuttings you have propagated yourself, simply plant them at the same depth they were growing in their container. Space your vines about 6 to 10 feet apart depending on the training system you plan to use. If you are growing on an arbor or pergola, you can get away with wider spacing. For a traditional trellis system with rows, 8 feet between vines is a good rule of thumb. After planting, water deeply and apply a thick layer of mulch, about 3 to 4 inches of wood chips or straw, keeping it a few inches away from the trunk. This helps retain moisture and suppress weeds while the vine gets established. For the first year, your main goal is root development, not fruit production. In fact, you should pinch off any flower clusters that form in the first year or 2, so the vine puts all its energy into building a strong root system. Now we need to talk about support and training, because this is where grape growing either clicks into place or becomes a frustrating mess. Grapes are vines, and they will grow wherever they can reach. Without proper support and training, you end up with a tangled jungle that is impossible to manage and produces far less fruit than it should. There are several training systems you can use, but I am going to focus on the 2 most practical for home gardeners. The first is the 4-arm Niffin system, which works beautifully on a simple 2-wire trellis. You run one wire at about 3 feet high and another at about 6 feet high. The vine grows up to the top wire, and you train 4 main arms along the wires, 2 on each wire going in opposite directions. Each year you select new fruiting canes from near the trunk to replace the arms that produced last year. The second option is growing on an arbor or pergola, which is what I do for my table grapes. This creates a beautiful shaded structure and makes harvesting easy since the grape clusters hang down at eye level. The key is to establish a strong main trunk up to the top of the structure, then train permanent arms called cordons along the beams. Fruiting canes grow down from these cordons each year. Whatever system you choose, the first 2 years are all about building structure. In year 1, focus on growing one strong, straight trunk. Tie it to a stake and remove any side shoots. In year 2, let the trunk grow up to your top wire or the top of your arbor, then pinch the tip to encourage branching. Select 2 to 4 of the strongest branches to become your permanent arms. By the way, if you are finding this helpful so far, take a second to subscribe so you do not miss future videos like this one. All right, let us keep going. Once your vine structure is established, ongoing care becomes pretty straightforward. The 3 things you need to stay on top of are watering, fertilizing, and pruning. For watering, established grapevines are surprisingly drought tolerant. Their deep root systems can find moisture that other plants cannot reach. That said, consistent water during the growing season, especially while fruit is developing, will give you bigger, juicier grapes. I water my vines deeply once a week during dry spells, giving each plant about 5 gallons. The key is deep, infrequent watering that encourages roots to grow down rather than shallow. Frequent watering that keeps roots near the surface. For fertilizing, grapes are not heavy feeders. Too much nitrogen actually causes problems, giving you lots of leafy growth but poor fruit production. I apply a balanced fertilizer, something like a 10-10-10, once in early spring, just as the buds start to swell. I use about 1 pound per vine, scattered in a ring, about 18 inches from the trunk. If your soil is poor, you can add a second light application right after fruit set. But that is usually not necessary if you are mulching with compost. Pruning is where most people get nervous, but it is also the most important thing you can do for consistent grape production. Remember what I said earlier about grapes fruiting on 1-year-old wood? This means you need to remove most of last year's growth each winter to make room for new. Fruiting canes. The best time to prune is late winter, after the coldest weather has passed but before the buds start to swell. For the Niffen system, you select 4 healthy canes from last year's growth, 1 for each arm position, and remove everything else. Each cane you keep should have about 10 to 15 buds. You also want to leave a short spur with 2 buds near the base of each arm as a backup, and to provide next year's fruiting canes. For an arbor system, the process is similar. You cut back each fruiting cane to a spur with 2 or 3 buds. These buds will produce new canes that flower and fruit this summer. It sounds complicated, but once you do it a couple of times, it becomes second nature. The key is not to be timid. You will remove 80 to 90% of last year's growth, and that is exactly what the vine needs. One more thing about pruning. During the growing season, you will also want to do some light maintenance. I pinch off suckers that sprout from the base of the trunk, and I trim back excessive leaf growth around the fruit clusters to improve air circulation and sun exposure. This helps the grapes ripen evenly and reduces disease pressure. Now let us talk about some common problems you might run into and how to solve them. First, powdery mildew. This is probably the most common grape disease, and you will recognize it by the white, powdery coating on leaves and sometimes on the fruit. It thrives in warm, humid conditions with poor air circulation. The best prevention is proper pruning to open up the canopy and let air flow through. If you do see it, remove affected leaves immediately and spray with a sulfur-based fungicide or a baking soda solution. About 1 tablespoon of baking soda per gallon of water with a few drops of dish soap to help it stick. Second, black rot. This fungal disease shows up as brown spots on leaves that eventually develop tiny black dots. On the fruit, you will see the grapes turn brown, shrivel up, and become hard little mummies. Black rot overwinters in those mummified fruits and in infected cane tissue, so sanitation is critical. Remove and destroy all infected material, never compost it, and clean up any dropped fruit. Spray with a copper-based fungicide starting when new shoots are about 6 inches long and repeat every 10 to 14 days through fruit set. Third, Japanese beetles. These shiny copper and green beetles can skeletonize grape leaves in a matter of days. I hand-pick them in the early morning when they are sluggish, dropping them into a bucket of soapy water. For heavy infestations, neem oil or spinosad sprays can help, but you need to reapply after rain. Avoid those Japanese beetle traps because they actually attract more beetles to your yard than they catch. Fourth, birds. Once your grapes start to ripen, every bird in the neighborhood will want a taste. The only reliable solution is netting. I drape bird netting over my arbor about 2 weeks before harvest and secure it at the bottom so birds cannot sneak underneath. It is a bit of a hassle to put up and take down, but it is the difference between harvesting grapes yourself and feeding the local wildlife. Fifth, poor fruit set. If your vine flowers but does not produce much fruit, the most common cause is over-fertilization with nitrogen. Cut back on the fertilizer and make sure you are pruning properly. Some years, late frosts can also damage flower buds. If frost is forecast when your vine is blooming, drape it with a sheet or frost blanket overnight. The good news is that if you follow the steps we have covered, choosing disease-resistant varieties, providing good air circulation, and staying on top of pruning, you should be able to avoid most of these issues. Now for the moment you have been waiting for. Harvesting your grapes. Depending on your variety and climate, grapes typically ripen somewhere between late summer and mid-fall, usually August through October. But here is the thing. You cannot rely on color alone to tell you when they are ready. Grapes change color weeks before they are fully ripe. The best way to know if your grapes are ready is to taste them. Seriously, just pick a grape from the bottom of a cluster and try it. Grapes ripen from the top of the cluster down, so if the bottom grapes are sweet and flavorful, the whole cluster is ready. You are looking for full sweetness with no sour or tart notes. The grapes should also come off the stem easily without a lot of tugging. When you harvest, use sharp scissors or pruning shears to cut the entire cluster from the vine. Try not to handle the grapes themselves too much, because that can rub off the natural waxy coating called bloom that helps protect them. Harvest in the morning after any dew has dried for the best shelf life. A mature grapevine can produce 15 to 20 pounds of fruit per year, sometimes more. That is a lot of grapes from a single plant. And here is what I love about this. Once you have the process down, you are set for life. That vine will keep producing year after year, decade after decade. Now for that bonus tip I promised at the beginning. If you want an endless supply of grapevines without spending another dime, here is what you do. Every winter when you prune, save the best cuttings from your healthiest, most productive vines. Select canes that are about pencil thickness with closely spaced nodes, which indicates the plant was healthy and well-nourished when it grew that cane. Bundle 10 or 15 cuttings together with a rubber band, label them with the variety name, and bury them in a shallow trench or a bucket of damp sand in a cool location like an unheated garage or root cellar. You want to keep them cold and moist, but not frozen. This process, called calicing, encourages the cut ends to begin forming root tissue before you even plant them. In early spring, pull out your cuttings and you will see a white, lumpy callus forming on the bottom end. Plant these callus cuttings in pots or directly in the ground, and your success rate will be significantly higher than with fresh cuttings. I do this every year and usually end up with more rooted vines than I know what to do with. I give them away to friends and neighbors, and now there are grapes growing all over my community that all came from my original vines. So that is everything you need to know about growing an endless supply of grapes. If you found this helpful, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you do not miss future videos. I would love to hear from you in the comments. What grape varieties are you growing? Or what varieties are you thinking about trying? Drop your questions below, and I will do my best to answer them. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.